Why have the Detroit Lions done nothing to make this football team better this offseason? This was supposed to be the year that Brad Holmes took this roster over the top, the year that he traded for an all pro to put next to Aiden Hutchinson, the year that he put all his chips on the table to win this Detroit Lions team a Super Bowl. And yet, after 48 hours of free agency and weeks to make a trade, the Detroit Lions are no better today than they were the day they stepped off the field in the divisional round against the Washington Commanders. That is what everybody is telling you. That is what the media may say. That is what a lot of fans are feeling. And yet, with free agency being a couple days in, with Brad Holmes not spending very much money outside of the DJ Reed hire, the Lions are still good. They're in a good place, and they are still very much a contending team for a Super Bowl this season. And today, we're going to take a look at the free agency. We're going to take a look at the offseason, talk about why the Detroit Lions have been a little bit less aggressive, take a look at why they've been quite conservative as opposed to most teams, and really just go over what the Lions strategy may be and while it's not as bad as some people make it out to be. Now, the Lions went into this offseason with a lot of hype, right? They went into the offseason with $51 million to spend, with losing several players and a lot of their depth pieces from a year ago, and having 7 draft picks to work with. They were one of the best teams as far as situations go as to going into the offseason with the opportunity to improve and get better. And yet, going through free agency, the Detroit Lions haven't done that. They've signed DJ Reed to a big deal. They re-signed Derek Barnes to a nice contract. And last night, they signed a backup nose tackle to a $4.6 million contract in Roy Lopez from the Arizona Cardinals. They re-signed Marcus Davenport for $2 million. They re-signed Anthony Pittman and Ezekiel Turner for depth options at linebacker. But outside of that, they've done relatively little. They've signed a couple of depth players. They've signed 1 or 2 starters, but they really haven't made a big splash to make the roster better than it was going into last year. And a lot of people are upset about that. A lot of people are very frustrated with the fact that it feels like the Lions are so incredibly close, and yet Brad Holmes is sitting on his hands and knees, not doing a thing. And I get it, because the Lions do have major needs. They have needs at cornerback, as they lost 3 of their secondary members this year in Emmanuel Mosley, Kendall Vildor, and Khalil Dorsey. They have edge rushers that they're missing out on, as they're losing 3 there in John Kaminsky and Al-Qaeda Muhammad and Zadarius Smith. They're losing several defensive tackles, including Kyle Pico, Pat O'Connor, Levi Onwuzurike, as well as wide receivers like Tim Patrick and some others. They do have needs, and the Lions do need to fill out their roster by the time the draft rolls around, but there is still opportunity to do that. The Lions very, very rarely need starters in free agency at this point of the Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell regime, and the same can be said this year. The starting needs this year are edge rusher, guard, and defensive tackle. The guard position is really a weak need as well, as Graham Glasgow is still under contract, Christian Mahogany looks really good, and Brad Holmes has shown the ability to find these players in the draft that immediately contribute despite not being top picks at their position. So the offensive line, I think, could use a starting guard, but if they don't, I still think they're in a really good spot, meaning all they really need to ensure as a starter is defensive tackle for the first 4, 5, 6 weeks of the NFL season, and an edge rusher to put next to Aiden Hutchinson and be the edge rusher too. Those are the only needs left on this roster to be filled, and free agency isn't the time to do that. Free agency isn't the point right now, at least, where they can afford to really do so. Now, they can add depth players, of course. They can add players in the second and third rotations of this line, but there is no edge rusher in free agency right now that is going to start next to Aiden Hutchinson all season. There is no defensive tackle in free agency that is going to make a massive splash and put the Detroit Lions over the top as Super Bowl contenders. There are a couple of guards out there that are quite good, and I'm sure Brad Holmes working with them right now, but the guard market has been relatively quiet. Will Fries from the Indianapolis Colts is a player that was at the top of the market. Even he took over 24 hours to sign a contract. Kevin Zeitler is still out there. Mekhi Becton is still out there. Brandon Scherf is still out there. And there are several options available for the Detroit Lions as free agency continues. But it's not a loaded free agency class. It's not an extremely talented free agency class. And for those of you that are going to say, well, make a trade for Trey Hendrickson, he's going to want $30 million a year. The Lions don't have the money to give that out right now, especially with all the big contracts that they have coming up in the near future with Aiden Hutchinson, Jamison Williams, Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch, Sam Laporta, Jameer Gibbs, Jack Campbell. All of these players need to get paid, and several of those players will make $20+ million a season. And as it is right now, the Lions will already have to give away several of their cornerstone pieces simply because they will not have the money to pay them all. Why would you invest another $30 million on the defensive line when you don't need it to do so? Taking a look at the draft picks, and that's, I think, where Brad Holmes really is going to succeed this year. There's a lot of options at all of the positions of need. At defensive end, you have guys like Mike Green, Landon Jackson, Jack Sawyer, Donovan Ezuruku, right? Players that can be impactful on day one, guys that can rush the passer, defend the run, be that player next to Aiden Hutchinson. And as a bonus, you don't need to market your future. You don't need to give away your draft picks. You don't need to do all of these different things and sacrifice your future because these are guys that can start immediately. At the defensive tackle position, right? You have Derek Harmon out of Oregon. You have Tyler Williams, Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant, TJ Sanders, all of which can play for several weeks immediately on day one as Aleem McNeil recovers and then take a backseat / rotational role as the season continues and when Aleem comes back. At the guard position, you have Tyler Booker from Alabama, Gray Zabel from NDSU. You have Donovan Jackson from Ohio State, players that can start day one, and not to mention some other guards on day 2 and 3. I think Addison West out of Western Michigan is a really underrated player that will go on day 3. He could start in the NFL for several teams. He's going to be a day 2, day 3 option for Brad Holmes to go take and get another steal in the draft, just like Mahogany from a season ago. There are a ton of options for the Lions in the draft, and that's where Brad Holmes has shown his success. That's where Brad Holmes has proven to be one of the best general managers in the game of football. And that's not to say the Lions won't make moves in free agency. As the days go on and as days 3, 4, 5, as weeks 1 go into week 2, the Lions will continue to make signings. They're not going to break the bank on a single player. And I'd be shocked at this point if the Lions spend even $10 million on a single player or addition. But there are options, right? There are players at wide receiver like DJ Chark, Tim Patrick, Rondale Moore, Cooper Kupp. At cornerback, you have veteran players like Jeff Okudah, Isaiah Oliver, Darnay Holmes, Rasul Douglas. At safety, you have Marcus Williams, Jordan Fuller, Quandre Diggs, and Mike Edwards, whose name didn't get all the way on the graphic, but that's okay. There are lots of veteran players out there. You can add at the edge rusher position, guys like Matt Judon, players that are younger, players that are more veteran, guys that are healthy, because you're not going to get a 10, 12, 15 sack player out of free agency, but Matt Judon can contribute 6, 7, 8 sacks potentially. Even just 2 years ago, he was playing like an all-pro edge rusher in New England. And so there are options in free agency, right? There are players that will get signed. There are depth options that will be filled. Cornerbacks 4 and 5 will be filled out in free agency. Edge rushers 5 and 6 will be filled out in free agency. The Lions probably will sign another small defensive tackle. They probably will sign a guard. They probably will do different things in the NFL free agency market. But they don't need starters from free agency. There are no starters left in free agency. So for everybody that's upset that Brad Holmes didn't get a splashy player, for everybody upset that Brad Holmes didn't spend $50 million to bring in Javon Hargraves or $60 million to bring in a 32-year-old Jonathan Allen, it's okay. The Lions have the talent. A lot of the big name free agents to come off the market wouldn't even start in Detroit, so there's no reason to give them that big of a contract. And the draft is still up and coming. Free agency has not closed. It will not close. It does not close until after the Super Bowl when the Lions could potentially already be there. The Lions have a Super Bowl roster right now. They have nearly a top 10 player at every single position on their roster, both offensively and defensively. And all they really need right now through free agency is to fill out the depth, to get a couple of players as just in case options, and they will be okay. So with that being said, please be patient. Please do not fall for people on social media saying the Lions season is over, their window is closed, everything is chaos, and everything is bad. I know who is you're talking to, but it's not. The Lions are a fantastic football team. They are a young football team. They are a hungry football team. They have an excellent coaching staff. And with a couple of depth moves at cornerback, at edge rusher, at safety, at different options and positions, they will be okay. If we are relying on Brad Holmes to make 2 or 3 hits in the draft to win a Super Bowl, I feel absolutely comfortable with that. If we're trusting Brad Holmes to do what he has done over the last 4 seasons and make the Lions better going into 2025, I think we can all trust him to do that. So, with that being said, please be patient, please relax, wait till the final product is actually on the field before you judge it, because a lot of people don't know what they're talking about. And I'm not necessarily one of them. I very well could be wrong about several things, but we can't judge the Lions off of paper, because if we judge them off of paper, they would have won a Super Bowl last year. If we judge them off of paper, they may win a Super Bowl this year. But we need to see them play on the field. We need to actually see the finished product and the finished vision. So wait until after the draft. Wait until training camp to truly judge Brad Holmes' performance in free agency, because championships are not won in March. They are not won in April. They are not won in free agency, and they're not even won in the NFL draft. They are won in December, in January, in February, and that is where Brad Holmes is working to get the Lions. So with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. Let me know down in the comments below how you feel about the free agency so far, how you feel about the offseason, what players you want to see the Lions add, because the additions are coming, the signings are on their way. But with that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.